Welcome to the webinar, Reliable Audio over Unreliable Networks. My name is Derek Badala. I work with Syntax, who is one of the distributors of Digigram technology, IP audio codecs, LAN audio. And we're going to get started in just another minute, just waiting for a few other people to show up. Some of you are live on YouTube watching this there. You can ask questions. Some of you are in our Zoom environment. So if you have a question, feel free to chat me a question. We'll try to answer those questions as they come up. So to get started, we're going to do a little bit of an IP audio technology overview, just so we have some basics about IP audio and what we need to do to overcome some of the challenges when we're trying to do high quality audio over public internet. Sort of our summary today is we're going to discuss what is IP, what is IP audio, uh, IP audio and broadcast, compression types, bit rate of your network, compression and latency, and what the relationships are between those things and how that affects your stream and what you might be doing. We're going to get into audio over a wide area network, specifically a public internet, which is what a lot of people are trying to do in lieu of ISDN, or being able to having to pay hefty fees to do it on an backbone infrastructure in your city, town, or state. And then this webinar wouldn't be complete without offering you some solutions, technology that is available that you're going to want to know about for doing reliable audio, especially with network bit rates that are changing and using the internet and all the variables that come along with it. So we're going to give you some solutions today so you actually have some things to work with in doing some of these things. And if you have specific questions, you can ask them as we go in the chat. If you're on the Facebook or YouTube channels watching this, you can do that as well. And if you want to speak to me offline, I'll give you my information at the end of this webinar, and we can talk about your specific project and how we might be able to help. So to get started, what I want to do is sort of present a typical audio over IP environment using a radio broadcast sort of picture. So what you're looking at right now is remote broadcasting on the left, the production studio or remote truck perhaps in the middle, and distribution. So we really have three distinct areas of broadcast that we need to sort of define. So the remote broadcasting side will be contribution, could be talk shows, could be sports commentary, could be music concerts or other performances that you want to broadcast back to a central spot in the studio. And then, of course, once you're receiving that audio, whether you're going to add anything to it, process it, etc., then on the right side, we're going to get into distribution, program distribution. And the dotted lines in this diagram, we're using the internet. We're using public IP. So on the blue lines on the left, we're going remote into the studio. And on the yellow dots on the right, we're distributing that audio rather out to several points. So we're multicasting. So what is IP and RTP? Because these are two concepts that we need to define in order to talk about overcoming the challenges. So IP, basically, when we talk about IP data over a LAN or a WAN, we have little datagrams, which are self-contained, independent entities of data that are carrying sufficient information from point A to point B. And the protocol, the IP protocol, actually establishes an end-to-end communication link over networks to route data from a source to a destination. And there's always a best attempt to deliver that data uninhabited or uninterrupted. That doesn't always happen because packets get corrupted, packets arrive at different times when they're not supposed to, or they get duplicated. So we really need to address all of these variables that can occur in public IP in order to do high quality audio. Another concept, and most familiar with the idea of an IP address. It's one address per network interface. So if you're dealing with hardware or a computer and you have an Ethernet port, that's your network interface, and there'll be a local IP address. And of course, if you're working from home, you have an internet service. You also have a public IP address of your router, potentially, that you're connecting all your devices in your home to. And these really play an important role, because when we talk about redundancy, we need to be talking about multiple IP addresses. And we're going to circle back on that in a moment. Now, UDP is a protocol that's been used for years, and it's really one of the core members of an internet protocol suite. It stands for User Datagram Protocol. Now, that's been advanced to something called RTP, which is how we do more complex data like multimedia, audio, video over IP. And it stands for Real Time Protocol. And from basically 96 to 2003, this has been the IP protocol for delivering audio and video over IP networks. And it sort of runs on top of UDP, and is used in conjunction with control protocols. Now, why is it important for us as audio engineers to know these things? Because when we set up our networks using public IP, we're going to run into a variety of variables and other things that we need to address in setting up our codecs to do it correctly. So, another protocol you're going to want to be familiar with is this term called SIP. It's a signaling protocol. It basically helps RTP connections establish each other over a network. So you don't have to have public IP addresses and local IP addresses when you use SIP, because it's sort of part of that protocol. And when we do IP audio and broadcast, here's what we need to know and factors that are going to affect us when we're trying to do high quality audio. Number one, IP is what we're doing to get audio from point A to point B. RTP and SIP or SIP are going to be the protocols that we might run into and we want to better understand. So RTP is used for real-time transport of audio. And SIP is a typical, it's not always used, but it's a typical protocol used to establish a connection over a network. It's a little easier to set up. It also can allow interoperability between manufacturers. Now, the factors that are going to affect you in doing audio are going to be the compression used by the codec and the network bit rate of your local and wide area network. Audio compression is something that is used, and we're going to get into, because you're going to run into the different selections and choices and parameters and decisions you have to make as to which compression algorithm you're going to use. And network bit rate is going to be something you don't always know when you're using the internet. So why audio compression? That's because we have to adapt the bit rate of real-time audio to typical networks that can't handle, full uncompressed PCM audio. And there are two types of audio compressions in the audio industry that we talk about: lossless compressions and lossy compressions. The advantage of lossless compressions is there's no loss of audio quality, so it's what we typically go for. However, there's a weakness when using this over public IP, because there's not a constant bit rate, and it's a pretty low average compression ratio, which doesn't get the job done for getting 24 channels of audio compressed on and using over public IP. If you only have 5 megabits up and down for your local network, that's going to be a problem. So lossy algorithms are used because there's a couple of advantages. You have a fixed bit rate, and there's a lot of compression ratios that are still good for audio quality. And it's what the radio and television industry has adopted for the audio side of doing broadcasting. Now, the one weakness of using compression is that you're going to add some latency latency between your encoder and decoder, because it takes time for that to actually decode the signal. And we're going to talk a little bit about the algorithms themselves, what they result in for network bitrate and latency. And that's probably the most commonly asked question when we get into this. So compressions that you might run across when you're talking about audio or voice over IP is things known as G711 and G722. You can see the sample rates are low. The audio bandwidth is typical bandwidth you'd find for the human voice, and it doesn't take much of a bit rate, because we're talking 64 kilobits per second, which is easily handled by any bad internet connection. High audio quality for like radio and TV audio, music, or what we refer to as complex audio, is going to be things like MP2, MP3, AAC, Opus, aptX, just to name a few. These are pretty commonly used in the radio broadcast sector. And we're going to sort of define them for you here, because you're going to know how to use these and how they apply to your network. The first one is just what uncompressed audio looks like. We take a sample or a snapshot of an audio waveform and represent it as little bits of information, and it's typically referred to as PCM. which is uncompressed digital audio. Now, when we do PCM over a network, we talk about 16-bit 48K sample rate, or more commonly 24-bit 48K. You need a network bit rate of 2.3 megabits per second to do PCM stereo audio, which can eat up a lot of your bandwidth if you're talking about an unreliable network. So we can actually look at other kinds of compression that will compress the audio and get that into the kilobits per second range. So the first one I want to talk about is MP2. MP2 came before MP3, and it was standardized in 1993. And it really had one goal: give the broadcast what was perceived by the Society of Broadcast Engineers as CD quality, and to do it at a bit rate of 256 kilobits per second. And at that time, it was selected as reference compression format for broadcast radio. Along came MP3, which had one objective: cut the bit rate in half. So go from what we defined 256. So we wanted to get it down to 128. So we wanted, the objective of MP3 was to get CD quality audio equal to what MP2 was doing, but do it at half the bit rate, which is 128 kilobits per second. In reality, it's more like 192 kilobits per second if you want to be kind of an audiophile. But MP3 is typically 128 kilobits per second for web radio, and it really became the standard format for web radio after 1993. We also are familiar with MP3 on using our MP3 players, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, with those, you got to select all the way up to 256 or 358. But you will run into MP2 and MP3 in a lot of encoders and decoders, and you should understand what kind of bit rate you're dealing with. And if we start doubling and tripling and quadrupling the number of audio channels, you obviously need to double and triple and quadruple the bit rate and still stay under the megabits per second ratio. Now, in 1997, the Society of Broadcast Engineers got together and said, okay, we want to do even better quality audio, what we perceive to be higher quality, because, we started to get into more 96, recordings that were no longer 48K, but 96K and 192. And so consumers and engineers were getting more and more spoiled with higher quality audio, and they wanted a way to broadcast that and have really good quality audio in your car and doing broadcasting. So this advanced audio compression technology was developed and standardized around 1997. And its objective was to increase the audio quality of MP3, but keep the same bit rate, keep it at 190, at 128. And several flavors emerged from 1997 all through the early 2000s into 2016. And the trade-off was always between bit rate, audio quality, and that, of course, is subjective, and latency. So several flavors emerged: AAC, LC, AAC V1, LD, ELD, etc. And you will see these settings in your audio codecs, and now you'll understand where they came from and what they mean. So the last one that came out was, well, it's not the last one, but it was certainly one that when it did come out became extremely popular, because all of these compression algorithms had to be licensed if you were going to use them in your hardware. So one came out that was royalty free, and it was open source, and it's called Opus. And you'll probably hear about Opus. And it's considered very adequate from speech to complex radio, and compares and stacks up very nicely against the other compression algorithms I just defined. But Opus will, kind of require a little bit higher bit rate to get the quality at a point where it's going to be better than some of these other algorithms. So you, as an engineer setting up connections, might experiment based on the network that you're using, which one to use: Opus or AAC, or what version of AAC, or whether MP2 or MP3 makes sense. So what we did is we put together a chart comparing compression algorithm used, the bit rate of the network needed, and what the latency, encoder to decoder latency, would be. And you can sort of see in this chart, as you go down, you have PCM at the top, which is going to require the fastest network. And we get down in the middle of the chart where we're looking at AAC, LD, ELD, Opus, and the bit rates are a little bit higher, 202, 280, 160. and the different latencies that you get. So when you need low latency, like in the 30s and 40s, you're looking at AAC. If you can live with Opus, which is in the 70s, that's where you're talking about, pretty low latency, high quality audio, a pretty easy network bit rate to accommodate what you're trying to do. And you can sort of keep this chart in mind. If we're doing multi-channel audio, like, 4 channels, you double it, 8 channels, you double that from there and you keep going. So audio over a local area network is a lot easier because we're dealing with a constant fixed bit rate. And there's lots of technologies used for local LAN audio, Dante, Livewire, WheatNet, QLAN, they're all kind of AS67 compliant, and it requires device synchronization and some sort of device discovery. So if you're coming from the audio industry where you're normally thinking about things like Dante or AVB or something, that's great. But when we want to stream audio from one point to another using public internet, we can't use these technologies the way we use them on a LAN. So when we do audio over a wide area network using public internet, we got to accomplish a couple of things to overcome some challenges. And this audio over IP, due to the pandemic, has evolved, and more people are finding uses for public IP and audio that normally weren't doing it. If you were a show that was shut down, or you're a musician that can't record because you're quarantined, people were trying to use the internet essentially as an audio cable or a digital snake, and we're using streaming technologies to get audio from one point to another, and we were running into quality problems and other issues. So if that's you, you're going to find the next several minutes to be very, very helpful in overcoming that. So who is the customer? Who is the typical user of audio over public internet? Well, we have traditional broadcasters doing remote broadcasts, sports commentary, etc. Distance learning and training and virtual events who are doing audio centric things that they want to have higher quality audio would be another customer. Corporate AV, like doing remote translation. Maybe you're conducting an event in one building and you want remote people to be able to hear very high quality, something over and above what Zoom can do. Houses of worship that might want to broadcast to satellite locations, or do web radio broadcasting, or do remote translation all over the world. Musicians and artists trying to do live performances from home, or do audio parallel to video, where the audio is going to be very high quality, or perhaps just pro audio, remote production or podcasting, just using the internet as a digital audio conduit to share audio to several people and do it at very low latency. So those are some of the sort of the who's who of might be interested in this technology. So when we do audio over the internet, whether it's point to point or multicasting to many points, there's basic two things to keep in mind. There's lots of challenges, and there's no quality of service in most cases. So you're going to have no guaranteed bit rate from your house to somebody else's house using the internet. Packets will get lost or duplicated or disordered, and there's going to be jitter. So the challenges that you have to solve when you go about doing this professionally is, how do we receive all the packets? Because low quality networks are going to cause packet loss. Those are those datagrams that I talked about. How are we going to manage the packets when they're disordered or duplicated? Because that happens as well. How are we going to manage late packets due to network jitter? How are we going to manage clock drift, so that if we're sampling something at 48K, that it's actually decoded at exactly 48K? And then how are we going to have high audio quality with a limited network bit rate? Those are really the main things that we're here to talk about. So what I want to share with you is a technology that was developed and has evolved since 2009 that you might not be aware of. It's called Fluid IP, and it was designed by a company by the name of Digigram. It's built into all of their hardware codecs, really to give you the highest possible audio quality, very good stability, give you advanced redundant streaming, and very low latency latency, no matter what's going on with the network. And, there are other software codec solutions out there that are used. There's other hardware codec solutions that are out there. Cost becomes a factor. So what makes Digigram's Fluid IP unique from other things that are out there? So that's what I want to share with you here. Number one, Number two and number three, adaptable to any network. That's a very key benefit of what I'm going to share with you. These solutions can adapt to your network no matter how slow or how fast it is. Number two, you can initiate error correction if and when you need it. And number three, and probably most importantly, you can actually establish connections that have 100% redundancy between the encoder and the decoder. So when we talk about these solutions being most adaptable, what we really mean is every format that is out and available in the audio compression algorithm market for encoders is built in to this technology. Whether it's licensed or open source, it's all available to you so you can adapt your encoder to whatever network you're dealing with. That's number one. Number two, the error correction that you can dial in basically works like this. You have packets that represent an audio stream, and it will duplicate those packets as needed. And the decoder receives additional packets of the same information so that if some of those packets are lost, the decoder can actually still reconstruct the original stream because of those additional packets. Now, the consequences of using this forward error correction is you will need a faster, it will up the IP bit rate because you're throwing additional information down the pipe. And it will add a little latency because the decoder has to wait for the FEC packet to decode the previous frames because it takes time for the decoder to catch everything that's coming. Now, the last thing that I talked about was the dual restreaming. And this is probably the most important. And this goes back to the IP address conversation slide that I had a few minutes ago. All of the solutions that I'm going to present to you have multiple internet ports or Ethernet ports or network interfaces, however you want to think of it, so that you can actually set up a separate IP address for the same information, and the audio stream itself takes a completely separate path over the internet. So there's a duplicate stream, and we call that spatial diversity using two different IP network paths. In addition to the spatial diversity, we delay the second stream using time diversity. So if the error would occur on both streams simultaneously, it's not on the same packet. So that is all built in and available to you. So if you want to do very reliable audio over the internet, you have this 100% dual redundant streaming in addition to the error correction, in addition to having all of the network formats available to you to choose as far as your compression goes. We also do things like fixing jitter. So there's a buffer to handle that, as well as control clock drift, because we put actual data in the stream so that the decoder knows what the sample rate and everything is timestamped and everything comes in exactly as it needs to and is decoded accordingly. So, an example in real life would be maybe we have a product that is in one venue and we want to send multi channel audio from the first venue to the second, like you see in my diagram. Now, we have a hardware codec connected to the local network, taking audio from, say, the mixing console or some device that's there locally. It's connected to the internet. You can see in the middle of this diagram, we have two separate internet connections. So the audio is taking a completely different path over the internet to its destination, then it's decoded and put in the second venue. So all the packets are received. If there's any disordered packets, they're put in the proper order. The audio itself is synchronized, clock drift is corrected, and basically high audio quality is maintained no matter how unreliable that internet in the middle happens to be. Now, this diagram shows just a one-to-one connection, but of course we can do one-to-many as well. Maybe we want to connect Madison Square Garden to the Staples Center as another example, just to kind of open up your mind as to what we're talking about. So, what are these solutions? Well, in my diagram, I'm sort of highlighting every hardware device that's in the picture, and they're all the same. They can be used as encoders, as decoders. They can be used on the remote broadcasting side. They can be used on the distribution side. But these encoders and decoders all have this technology that I mentioned so that you can do reliable, high quality audio no matter what. And we're going to talk about the Akoya Talk. We'll talk about the Crosslink over here and the ServeLink. So we're going to get into all of that in a second. So these solutions are pronounced Ikoya, Crosslink, or Ikoya ServeLink. And here's sort of a picture of all of them in one screen. They all do the same thing. They'll all take your audio and encode it. So they have audio inputs, analog and digital inputs, and even audio over IP inputs like AS67, Ravenna, Dante, etc. And depending on what you're doing, you might just want to encode some stereo channels. You might want to encode 4 channels, 16 channels, or need something completely scalable. The one that I've highlighted on the bottom right is called a ServeLink because it is scalable up to 128 channels of audio. So it comes standard with 8 channels or 4 stereo channels, and you can scale it with a simple software update all the way up to 128 channels. And what I've highlighted in red is, in fact, the type of audio channels. Are they analog? Are they digital? How many channels? What's the local audio connectivity? So they're all going to do the basic thing, encode or decode audio, depending on where you put it in your system. Now, Ikoya Crosslinks and ServeLinks have been in operation for well over 10 years. It's probably close to 12 years now. There's over 10,000 codecs in use worldwide 24/7 by major household names that you've heard of in our industry. Apple, NBC Sports, BBC, quite a few others as well. And these codecs support all the pro audio formats that you typically run into. A typical hardware codec looks like this. You have controls on the front. It's a 19-inch 1RU space device. On the back, depending on which model, you might have analog inputs, digital inputs, multi-pin analog and digital inputs. You'll notice I've highlighted it on the back panel. There's redundant power supply. There's 4 network interfaces. That's because you might have redundant internet connections as well as redundant LAN connections. There's even a SD card reader in the front, and you can set up when you're using this as a decoder, you can set up priority. So if it's not receiving a stream, that it can default to a MP3 playlist on the SD card, and you can FTP into this anywhere in the world and update those files. You might even put this in all of your restaurants and send audio from your headquarters and have the same background music and announcements all coming from one destination, and all of your satellite locations are just receiving audio, for example. Lots of ways this can be used, and we're going to get into those applications momentarily. Now, the ServeLink I'm going to spend a little bit more time on because the ServeLink is completely scalable and has lots of capabilities that are not found in the Crosslink. So what I mean by that is it's a little bit larger device. It's still 19-inch rack, it's a little deeper, but because it can do a high number of channels, we give you IOs like AS67 and Dante or MADI, multi-channel analog or ASCBU inputs. So you can do multiple programs to multiple destinations in and out of multiple actual audio formats. So you're basically using the internet as a high channel density digital snake, and you can deliver audio programs to multiple transmitter sites or studios. Or if you want, you could do like 128 channels of Dante from one location and receive it at another location and have all those audio channels synchronized. The units can be synchronized to an NTP server or even a GPS clock. So that's all possible. Now, it's completely scalable. And I mentioned a couple minutes ago that this unit comes with 8 channels of audio and 8 encoders and decoders, and you can scale it with a software update up to 128 channels. So what we would like to do now is play a video. It's a short video, kind of just to open up your mind about how you might use this in professional audio applications besides just radio or television.
Every voice making joyous noise. Yeah, gonna be hard. Come together, feel this pain. Everybody, every voice making joyous noise. All the flame. Oh, it's gonna be hard. Come together now. Yeah. Everybody. Everybody gonna feel it. Every voice. Oh, gonna feel this pain. Come on. Over the flame.
Now, in that video, we're showing it sort of in a house of worship setting. But over the last 12 to 16 months, things have come up as far as using that for remote mixing applications where you might have audio from a live event coming back to another location, put into a console and remote mixed and streamed out to another situation. So you actually can do remote mixing and all kinds of interesting applications with that. In that video, we were showing the ServLink being used as some kind of means to connect your campuses. And maybe you're going to send audio from one satellite location to another and have it remixed in that local area or in that local room. So there's lots of different ways this technology can be used. And after I show that video, I usually get questions like, what's the network bit rate look like again when I'm doing 64 channels of Dante? So basically, if you were doing Opus, which is, midway, a little bit more than midway down this chart, you're talking 160 kilobits per second times, 32, because that's stereo. So you would multiply that times 32, and you're still in a very nominal network bit rate that even most residential internets won't have a problem with. So that's kind of how you apply that information. What about network security? You start connecting these things on a local network. How do we make sure that the codec itself does not have a vulnerability? Well, a typical IT design, you would have a firewall, and you'd put your audio codec just behind the initial firewall, and make sure it's not behind the firewalls that protect trusted and privileged information like you see in this diagram. Each layer is protected and security is properly maintained because we have incremental firewalls accordingly. And should DMZ located equipment be compromised, deeper levels can't be accessed. But we start using things like Ravenna or A67 or Dante, which is IP. We got to put that audio codec deeper in the facility, and we got to put it behind where the trusted or privileged information might be accessed. So codecs with these improved features sit deeper inside the network, and you have to open up ports in order for them to access the internet. And you don't want the codec itself to become a network vulnerability spot. So what Digigram did is they separated the hardware between the wide area network part of it and the local area network part. So the ServLink, for example, isolates Dante and AS67 from the wide area network world. So that's really how they're able to have very rock solid security. Now, in our diagram, we showed a portable codec called an Akoya Talk, and I want to play a video on what this codec is and how it can be used. So the Akoya Talk is really ultra mobility for doing broadcasting and streaming and things of that nature. That video shows a lot of, like sports commentary applications and other uses for this product. It's an all-in-one solution. It's sort of like the rack mount codecs, but with a mixer and a smartphone and the ability to put in a SIM card if you don't have a network connection where you are. And it's easy to use like a smartphone and obviously very portable. So, looking at the Akoya Talk a little more up close, the idea is you'd have that in the field with the ability to use a local Ethernet connection. It has multiple Ethernet ports, so the redundancy still stands. There's a built in Wi Fi module, so you can use Wi Fi. And there's also the ability to put up to 2 SIM cards in the unit, and it's 5G ready. So you can put in, Verizon or T Mobile, and you can set up redundancy where Ethernet might be primary and cellular could be backup or vice versa. So even if you lose power let's say you got it set up in a building somewhere and the power goes out, you still have the internal battery, and you still have the 4G as your backup because if the power goes out, obviously your network goes down using, your switches and routers and stuff. Back at the studio or truck or other part of the world, you have a codec that's receiving those signals. The unit itself has 3 mic inputs, has the ability to do talk back. In addition to your program audio, it's completely full duplex. So audio can come from the studio back into the unit for music beds and bumper music and all kinds of stuff. Very, very capable device. It's also completely interoperable with other manufacturers' codecs. And you'll notice in this picture, we have this cloud Akoya Connect or direct WAN connection. And I'm going to talk about Akoya Connect in a minute. So, you can use these directly. You can use it on a LAN as well as an internet as well, but you can use them directly with other manufacturers' products or a Digigram product. The unit itself has 2 battery slots. It comes with one. It comes with all of the necessary equipment to do everything that you saw in that video. So if we're doing Wi-Fi, if we're doing 2 SIM cards, it comes with a 64 gigabyte internal hard drive that you can record to. So there's quite a lot of capability and benefits in here, for you doing it live interviews or events, talk shows, commentaries, whatever it is you want to do. Connectivity wise, you got your typical headphone and mic inputs on the front. On the back, you have auxiliary inputs and outputs. So you can add more mic inputs if you need to. You even have GPIOs, so you can trigger stuff at the remote location from the studio or from the unit can back to the studio as well. So there's quite a lot going on here. You can access the internal hard drive by using the USB-C port on the back of the unit. So if you do any recordings, you can access them later, or if you want to put audio into the hard drive and use it, let's say you want to have preload music or interviews as part of your remote broadcast, all of that is possible. Okay. The last piece of the puzzle that I want to talk about is Akoya Connect and Akoya Guest. Now, here's the diagram that we put up early on. In fact, we put this diagram up a couple times. And we've been talking about Akoya Crosslinks, Servlinks, and the Akoya Talk, which are all hardware. Now I want to talk about Akoya Connect, which is cloud software. And basically, you can actually control, remote control, monitor, and manage your hardware codecs from anywhere in the world using Akoya Connect. Akoya Connect also allows you to connect your Digigram solutions to other third-party solutions that are SIP compatible. And I also want to share with you Akoya Guest, which will work on your mobile phone or any computer, because you might have situations where you need to establish a connection between 2 locations and one location has no hardware. So you have a way to create a high quality audio connection with somebody using a web browser. And we're going to show you how to do that. So first of all, Akoya Connect, Akoya Guest, or Akoya Mobile, which are really one and the same. Akoya Connect is Digigram's infrastructure, and it hosts a bunch of applications. These applications can be subscribed to by the customer where you can manage your hardware or monitor it or remote control. So, depending on the level of sophistication that you want to get into, you can subscribe to just the manage tool and monitor tool or the remote tool individually, or you can subscribe to all three. Akoya Guest is a web codec or a smartphone codec that you can subscribe to, which allows you to create links that are virtually hardwired to your channels of your hardware codec. So when you send a link to one of your colleagues in the field and they click on it, it establishes a connection between their web browser and channel 2 of your codec. And there's some features in that web browser that pop up, but essentially it's cloud software. And I'm going to demonstrate that for you right now. Now, Akoya Connect looks like this. You log into it, you can see all of your hardware, no matter where it's located in the world. You can establish connections, you can look at the quality of service statistics, you can dial other channels of other codecs in and around the world. You can set up users who can log into their portable codecs and dial different channels. So there's quite a bit you can do with this application. And, some diagrams of how you might use this, like here's a situation. Let's say you're Major League Baseball and you want to announce games from home. You can send a video feed to your sports commentators who are at home, and using Akoya Talk, they can connect back to a channel of a serve link in the studio, and the studio engineer can control all of the audio settings of the portables. That means they can control the microphone gain, they can control the headphone mix, the program audio, turn on phantom power, whatever you need to do. So the talent on the remote side just simply needs to turn on the box and plug in their microphone or headset. So in this example, we're showing 4 separate home sports commentators all connecting back to a single codec, and the studio can control all of them independently using a Koya Connect remote. Another example, maybe you want to do a tennis tournament. You might have your portable codec up in the booth, down on court side, and for ambient mics, and that's all connected to a serve link in the studio or a remote truck using public IP or even 4G. It could be a golf tournament. Lots of different ways this could be utilized. And then if you have a TriCaster or a similar device, you can marry that audio right back to your video and just give what I call audio flexibility for TV audio productions. If you want to use this technology for remote recordings and have a high quality recording, so like let's say you're in Hollywood and you want to do advanced dialogue replacement, ADR, you could actually use the Akoya Talk as an ADR kit and send that out to the actors at home, and they can connect back to the studio and reread their lines. And it can all be recorded in a very high quality way. And the studio can actually get on a conferencing platform like Zoom and see everybody, and then also control their audio remotely. It's pretty powerful stuff. All right, I promised I was going to do an Akoya Guest demonstration. So what I want to do is sort of review what Akoya Guest is. Akoya Guest is the studio sending you a link, not sending you hardware, and that link will connect you back to a particular channel of your codec. So this has been used all the time now. It's quite popular. It's been used by schools, music teachers, radio stations, TV stations, for intercom. Lots of ways you can use Akoya Guest. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you what it looks like. When you open it up in a browser, whether it's on a smartphone or a regular computer, you have the main screen on the left. And then if you tap the settings icon in the top right corner, it takes you to the settings screen on the right. And you have some basic settings. And I'm going to demonstrate exactly how this works using a smartphone. And I'll even use a third-party codec to show interoperability. So here we go. Derek Badala here with Syntax and representing Digigram. Today we want to show you the new version of Akoya Guest, using it with not only your web browser, but your smartphone, and how Akoya Guest, along with Akoya Connect, can connect to not only Digigram codecs, but third-party codecs. So today I've elected to use a Comrex AXA so we can really show how powerful Akoya Connect and Guest can be in any codec installation. So the diagram below me is your typical broadcast solution. And in this video, we're going to specifically focus on Akoya Guest for smartphone and web browser connecting to the studio with Akoya Connect. And also, as I said earlier, we're going to use a third-party codec. So in our Akoya Connect infrastructure, we will grab the settings for our third-party codec. We will log into our third-party codec GUI and put in those settings, which will register it on the Akoya Connect infrastructure. In addition to that, we will go into Akoya Guest on the Akoya Connect infrastructure and create links that can be sent to third-party folks that are going to connect remotely, and I can assign those links to the third-party codec itself. Once I've done that and I receive the link on my smartphone, I put my link into my smartphone web browser. In this case, it's an iPhone, so this is Safari. And I'm going to go over to the settings tab by simply tapping on that. And you're going to see some different settings if you've used Akoya Guest before. We have operating mode, audio IOs. You can see it's an iPhone mic this time. We have our usual input options, streaming options, stereo, and quality. So we're going to start there. And you can see when I tap the actual streaming quality, I can choose anything up to 256 down to 32. I'm going to go ahead and choose 256. And I have a choice between stereo or mono. And I'm going to choose stereo. As we move up, I'm going to elect not to use any of the echo cancellation or audio DSP at this time, but I can use it. And since I'm using an iPhone, I only have my iPhone microphone. I'm not using a headset right now. Operating mode. There are three choices. You have the standard, advanced, and light for low power smartphones. We recommend that when you are using a smartphone. Otherwise, use standard. And when you are using a smartphone that has music files or using a web browser, you can choose advanced. By choosing advanced, you'll see that it will reload the software. We now have the file input option, so we can choose to have that on or off. When it's on and we go back to the main screen, we can select a file and load it. And this is also true on a computer. So if you wanted to load a music file and play that, or load an interview that you did offline, that's what this feature is for. I'm going to go ahead and disable that. And I'll go back to the low power smart mode. Software will re-download. Now I will click on the back arrow and take us back to the main screen. First thing you're going to see that's new is you have feedback. You know what's going on. You also can see we're ready to place a call. So it's already made an established connection with sort of a preliminary connection with Akoya Connect until we actually hit the call button. We have a little counter, little reminder here that we encourage you to use a headset when going on air. And of course, our mute button. And on the smartphone, you're simply sliding the buttons over. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to make the call to the Comrex that's behind me. And you can see now that we're connected. I also can see that I have audio on my Comrex. And once I'm done and I want to hang up, simply select the hang up and slide it over. That's it. Thank you for watching. All right, so that's a little demonstration. I was using an iPhone in that example using Safari, but this could be your laptop. So if you're used to making Zoom calls and Skype calls with a good microphone and audio interface, that's fine. You can use Akoya Guest with your computer and that audio interface, et cetera, and basically have a very high quality connection. And, you know, somebody asked in one of the chats on the Zoom side of things about using a good microphone. And yeah, I mean, the better the mic you use, certainly that improves your quality dramatically. I was in Burbank, California a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of interest in using this technology to do ADR because actors are not, you know, going into the studios like they used to, and a lot of the lots are closed due to COVID. All right. So, three types of connections using Akoya Guest. You can actually buy just a subscription and have an Akoya Guest you'd have two links, one for you and one for the other person, and make a two-way call, and have a pretty high quality audio connection. In fact, the latency is faster or lower than a cell phone call, and you could use Akoya Guest on either end and have a good quality audio interface and record audio into your DAW and do it that way. You could do the more common approach, which is the studio has the hardware and the guest talent or somebody has the link, like you see here. So you got a Koya Guest to a digigram codec. And as I showed in the video, a Koya Guest to a third-party codec. Now, the real power of a Koya Guest and a Koya Connect is when you want to do multiple guests at once. So you could have a multi-channel, and in this example, you need hardware at the studio. So something like a cross-link dual or a serve link, and you can send out multiple links to multiple people simultaneously, and they can all be connected to the studio at one time. So this can actually grow and scale. So in this example, we have, 5 guests all connected, either mono or stereo. You have a choice, and they're all hardwired, virtually speaking, to different channels of the serve link back in the studio. So the engineer in the studio can deal with each guest separately and then provide a mix back to each guest that might be different than everybody else, or a mix minus, whatever you want to do. So there's a lot of power here. And, this setup that you're looking at can be used for remote recording sessions, all kinds of different things, in addition to just a sports commentary broadcast, but it certainly would be great for that. So Major League Baseball could send out a bunch of links, and provided everybody at home has a good headset and perhaps a good audio interface, which would be highly recommended. I wouldn't recommend just connecting your headset mic to your mini jack on your laptop, but you could. And now you can have a very high quality audio connection back to the studio. So this is stuff that all the TV and radio broadcast facilities are looking at, new ways to do broadcasts, save time, money, travel time, etc. So this is something that really has changed how things are done. So everything I presented to you today really is about giving you a one IP audio solution, where whether we're talking about the Akoya Talk remote codec, the web codec, Akoya Guest, or the studio codecs, Akoya Crosslink and ServeLink, you have the ability with Akoya Connect, which is the cloud infrastructure, to manage and monitor and remote control and set these systems up. Whether you're a small radio station facility, a commercial recording facility that is trying to do a lot of things remotely, or you're in TV or other types of streaming and broadcasting. There's really a lot of ways this technology can be used. And hopefully you see now all of the technology and the benefits and how it can overcome an unreliable network. Now, I put together, before we finish up here, sort of a bunch of application diagrams of what you can achieve. And some of these we've already covered throughout this webinar, but I kind of want to just give it to you at the end so you can kind of see all the ways in which this technology can be applied. So, we'll once again put up our typical radio or television broadcast setup, where we have remote broadcasting into a studio in the middle, and then that studio wanting to take that program and distribute it out to either web radio or a transmitter site, etc. And we even have codecs now that can do MPX. So if you're a radio facility with a bunch of transmitter sites, you don't have to have MPX equipment at every transmitter site. Now you can centralize your MPX setup by having an MPX encoder from Digigram in the studio, and you can have a very cost-effective decoder at all your transmitter sites, saving you thousands of dollars. And if you're interested to learn more about that specifically, feel free to comment in the Zoom or the YouTube stream, and we'll get you the information that you need. All right, so what are some of the applications besides just the normal broadcast application? Well, we could certainly put an Akoya Talk at home, in a living room, out in the field, and broadcast just about anything back to a church, back to the studio, back to a studio, a recording studio rather, or some other facility. If I want to connect multiple venues to do remote mixing or remote recording, perhaps a combination of the two, as well as intercom, or expand the seating to another location, or even do a remote screening room. If you're an Atmos provider and you want to have the ability to play an Atmos recording in one room, but also send the files multi-channel to another room so you can have your protected content stay in one place. This is another way you could use this. So you could have a serve link Dante, for example, in one venue, and using public IP, you could multicast those Dante audio channels to several venues at the same time. You can even share audio back to the serve link in venue A. And again, if you want more information about this, feel free to reach out to me after this webinar. We've shown a couple times now, if you want to have a home church that is got one praise and worship team, you want to send the multi-channel audio to the other churches, decode that audio and remix it for that room, that is possible. What if you want to have an alternative audience? Give your remote audience satellite radio quality audio performance. So not just do Facebook or YouTube live, but actually provide people who are on the go, or because radio is extremely popular, people listen to radio all the time, give a high quality feed, so all the audience has to do is go to your website and click a play button. Well, you could put an Akoya crosslink in your venue at your front of house, for example, put your audio into that, and using a CDN, which is a content delivery network, which you can have up to 400 listeners for free or unlimited listeners for a very nominal fee, you can provide a web radio solution to a school, to a high school. You could broadcast graduation. There's so many things you could do with this at a very low cost, and the quality of audio would be impeccable. What about audio quality for distance learning or virtual trade shows? And one thing I want to add to this is wouldn't be just like spoken word, because what we're doing with Zoom and all of that works just fine for that. This would be for situations where your distance learning is audio in nature, music in nature, perhaps, or your virtual trade show, you're doing demonstrations where audio is a key component. Like, let's say you're an instrument manufacturer and you want to demonstrate the quality of your product. This could be a way to do it. So we actually worked with one university to set up a very complex but amazing solution for them to do high quality audio lectures, because they were a music school. So what we did is we put a serve link on campus. All of the students get a unique link for that semester. They get on Zoom for the video. They don't connect the audio on the Zoom, but they connect the audio using a Koya guest. We actually put in an RME audio interface to handle a lot of the complex mix minus functions that would be required for this. And they can actually conduct things like conducting class, Pro Tools classes, any class where the audio was a key component of the class. And all the students could get on and hear the audio as if they were in the classroom, and they could all contribute audio to the class from their homes. So which would be key for any kind of music teaching situation. You could, of course, connect something like this to a QSYS or biamp system and conference rooms and et cetera. So there's a lot of ways this could expand depending on what your needs are. In addition to that, you could provide a web radio solution for your lectures, especially if those lectures are audio demonstrations and things like that. You could combine both remote people into a central location on the left side of this diagram, and then take that audio and send it out to a web radio feed for a very large audience. What about designing a university campus-wide broadcast streaming solution for like the sports leagues, universities, without getting into all the FCC stuff that comes along with it? Well, you might have a fleet of Akoya talk units for sports commentary of the university's different sporting events. That audio comes back to a serve link, only using a couple channels of that serve link, I might add. And then that gets fed into a cross link that then streams to a link on the university website to listen to the game. And you could do that scale that however many sporting events you need to do simultaneously, while also doing some of the distance learning stuff that I showed in the previous slide. So all of that's possible. I got a question that came up in the chat. Let me see if I can address that. How does Akoya help in a DAW software other than remote recording? Well, basically, Akoya is going to be an encoder decoder scenario. So if you have recording software that you need to play out to somebody else in another location, you could have Akoya's one in Studio A and one in Studio B, and connect those two DAWs using the internet. There are other ways to do it, but this would give you a very high quality, always on 24/7 digital tie line, basically. Another approach would be designing a remote translation solution, which, like United Nations or a church, you could have your audio from your meetings connected to an Akoya box. Using Akoya Guest, your translators can be off-site, asked to, log in, listen to the meeting, and translate in real time at a much better, higher quality. So that, which with language dictation and translation, the quality of the audio has to be really impeccable for that to work nicely. You also could use this in a church setting. You might have like a global translation solution where you have a church, say in Houston, Texas. In addition to praise team stuff, you might have the pastor's audio going out to multiple translators around the world, and then they can translate in real time in their local languages that come, that translation can be fed back to the church and rebroadcast to where it needs to go. Other possibilities, we had this come up recently where DJs, especially professional DJs who do work for major nightclubs, they wanted the ability to have their live mix performances broadcast to other venues, and have those venues pick up the broadcast, put in their local PA systems. So the quality of the audio for that has to be impeccable for that to work right. And they could do a live mix to multiple clubs at the same time. So, and then we get into our radio broadcasting setups where we have, we're streaming programs to various distribution points. We're doing terrestrial distribution to replace satellite, doing just public IP, which is far cheaper than renting satellite time. Also, we could do Akoya Crosslink with studio to transmitter links with all kinds of backups in place. And of course, we can create very powerful and compact radio broadcast studios, podcast studios using, interfaces and Akoya technology. This one is showing an RME solution, which has a virtual mixing solution built into it with headphones and everything for a local studio, but then using Akoya Connect and Akoya Guest for remote talent. So there's really quite a bit of applications of the various technologies that we've gone through today. So I hope this has been very helpful. If you are interested in more information, please send me an email. My name is Derek Badala. You can contact me at derek@syntax.com. And I want to thank everyone for your time today. Have a wonderful day.